Greetings from Zadar, Croatia, where I am live, and very happy to introduce today's guest teacher from another part of the world, not quite the other side, but in the same time zone, a bit south, Dr. Linda Kantor. Welcome, Linda. It's interesting, you and I haven't had a lot of interaction, but the interaction we have had through the International Mindfulness Integrity Network has really touched me, and your openness, your humor, your warmth. So it's great to have you here and get a chance to know you even better.
Well, thank you, Alan, for the opportunity, but also to get to know you, I hope.
You know, this project, if I can call it a project, has been most interesting. It's really forming a snapshot of teachers as we are in any given present moment, if that were recording, in the field here. So it will live on, but for now, we're very grateful to have this opportunity to be in this project. So Dr. Linda Kantor, let me introduce you. You're a counseling psychologist, a hypnotherapist, which is interesting. I'm curious about being a hypnotherapist in terms of guiding mindfulness and where that might intersect, where it might differ. So let me make a little note to come back and ask you about that. And a yoga teacher, and you're based in Cape Town, South Africa, which is where you are now. Yeah. In 1999, you taught the first MBSR program, Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction Program, in Cape Town, South Africa, which to me is an incredible distinction because you brought this work to this location. I'd like to come back to that too in just a moment. And now you co-facilitate the University of, and you're going to have to help me here, Stellenbosch.
Well done, Alan. Very good.
University of Stellenbosch's certification in mindfulness-based interventions, MBIs. Okay, we'll take a look at that too. You also have developed and teach a 2-year mindful leadership program. So certainly you're embodying leadership, and bringing MBSR to Cape Town and your work and all that you're doing now with the International Mindfulness Integrity Network. So I'm grateful for your work, and we all are. Thank you. Thanks for sharing it with us today. So 2 points within this introduction we'll come back to. One is, I think, the intersection of hypnotherapy and mindfulness guidance. Is there anything you could say towards that?
Yeah, I guess I'd have to think about this one a little bit more, but I guess the intersection is that potentiality for healing and transformation and relaxation. But I think, there are some distinct differences because in hypnotherapy, obviously, you're guiding a person to heal a particular issue and to work with, you're actually in support of their healing of a particular early childhood issue often, whereas with mindfulness, it is the practice of being in the moment where we're waking up to the moment we're actually in. But, I think there is a kind of intersection somewhere there. Certainly when I'm guiding into hypnotherapy, I would certainly always start with mindfulness and then move into that state where we can do some deep work.
Yeah. So then what I'm hearing, like with any therapy, it might be a little bit more goal orientated, where with mindfulness, we're holding space to meet the moment.
Yeah, very much so. And I think with hypnotherapy, you need the hypnotherapist to be there to guide you, whereas with mindfulness, it is your own internal practice. Once you've learned it, that you are, you're meeting yourself through that practice by yourself. So Yeah, I think that's a key distinction.
Even though sometimes in mindfulness, there is kind of that therapist voice that might show up a bit. So here you are bringing MBSR to Cape Town. And what was that like in the early days of that?
It's a good question, Alan. I think it was so different. The field was so different then. It was a question of traveling to the USA once I had discovered, mindfulness through my colleague, and then just, going and doing the 10-day training at Omega and coming back. And because there were two of us, my colleague Simon, who had been, a few months before, it was just a question of jumping in there and running our first group and not really having a clue about of any of the complexities that we know now in the field, but literally jumping in and I kind of, when I think back now, I think it's incredible how John trusted us with our own practice and trusted the integrity of our own practice to allow us to explore this program in that way. So I certainly, if I think back now, had no idea where it would take me and what I was doing. And the field was so new back then. I remember trying to market the program, and meditation was still kind of, it wasn't a buzzword at all at that point. So, there was a lot of suspicion around it. And so it took a while to get it off the ground. But so it's amazing just to look at how things have developed over the past decades.
And maybe that's a bit of inspiration for those of us who still struggle to fill classes. Because there you were starting without any help of anybody knowing what this was. Where did it all begin for you? Where did mindfulness move into your life?
I guess for me, it was more about, I prefer using often the word heartfulness. I think I'd have to go back to the womb, actually. My mother was a survivor of the Holocaust. So she's got a story of her own. And she grew up on a little Greek island. And so through a number of miracles and a whole story that's behind that, she was actually saved by a Catholic family. And so my grandparents were also saved. And then the family came to Africa. So you could say that I grew up in a way with an awareness of some of that intergenerational story, even though it wasn't really spoken about in a conscious way at all. I was very aware of the emotions and very aware of, having a grandmother who spoke and grandparents who spoke many different languages, living in Africa, and so I think also, growing up, I grew up in not in South Africa, in what was then Rhodesia and is now called Zimbabwe, at a time when there was a civil war. And so I think growing up with all of that, there was really an awareness for me around, I guess, human destruction and the impact of violence and the impact of separation. And I guess there was just this innate need to try and heal something. And it took me a while to understand exactly, and I think it's still taking me a while to understand the intergenerational story. And but I'm pretty sure that a large part of that is what's got me into this work. And then I think as part of that, I studied psychology. So I was looking for answers, as one does, and but really frustrated with what I was being taught in my classes. I just kept on feeling like there must be some other way to support people that really is from the inside out. I'd actually been, from age 17 or so, started yoga and meditation, even though my family was like, what is this stuff you're doing? So I think, when I discovered meditation, I started actually with Transcendental Meditation, the penny started to drop around, okay, there's a whole nother world here that has a lot of potentiality in healing and self-healing. So I think a confluence of all of that, and I think one never knows where life takes us. Meeting my partner Simon, the person who I started MBSR in South Africa with, and it was a kind of fortuitous meeting. So life just kind of takes you where you're supposed to be going, I guess, on some level. So I think all of that together.
Wow, that's quite a story of a life that has been lived outside of one culture, one location, and intergenerational influences that I think we're seeing so much of unfold in the world now that are coming to bear, and we don't quite understand the depth of it. So you have a very deep experience within that. And Transcendental Meditation being a bit different than the mindfulness that we develop through our meditation practices now, mainly Vipassana, Transcendental being a concentration meditation. Where did you make that shift?
Yeah, I guess the shift was when I met Simon, and he'd gone actually to America, and he'd met John, and he'd done the Omega training, and I was still doing TM, and then and I was working as a psychologist, and he said, well, come and run this 8-week program with me. So I was like, oh, all right, why not? So I went to Omega and, went straight, and I had never experienced mindfulness meditation. So, there was that transition. I remember just as I kind of hit the cushion at Omega. I remember just such a deep realization of, oh my goodness, there's just so much more to the practice of meditation. And I had been like a really good meditator. I always laugh because I was like TM 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes in the evening. I was like such a disciplined meditator, but it didn't. I mean, I'm sure it did help, but hadn't made that translation into the moments of my life and into the relationships of my life. I hadn't understood that at all. And so it was such a revelation to recognize that there's this whole other way of being in life that is far, far more than a meditation practice. So I think it was actually on that retreat where that transition just, I was woken up to that transition.
So after Omega and after that initial training, is that when you came back and began the MBSR program? And how did that progress in your work as a therapist and moving forward with the university and what you're involved in now? What was that progression like?
I think I always joke that if I had known when I went to Omega where this would take me, maybe I would have run in another direction. I could have never predicted the journey that it took me on. What wasn't kind of just on the spur of the moment decision to support a friend with an 8-week program turned into my life's work. And so I guess, I was really surprised when I came back from Omega. We went straight into running our first MBSR. And I had, I put some people who were in therapy with me onto that program, people that had been with me for a while. And I was very much of the model of, change is like long-term and with a therapist. And in 8 weeks, I was seeing things that I couldn't actually believe were happening in 8 weeks. And so I think the passion, I recall the passion that we had to share it and to talk about it and to speak to doctors and psychologists and whoever would be open to putting people on board. And I also think we were very, very supported in unusual ways along the way. One of the local hospitals, without knowing what we were doing, opened, gave us a free venue in the waiting room of their maternity ward, which was very symbolic, to start running programs. Because the hospital manager just kind of got what we were wanting to share. And I don't think I could have predicted how, other health professionals then started to get interested in the program and come and do it with us. And there was this kind of trajectory, this movement, this river that I was then on, which led to, the creation of the Institute for Mindfulness South Africa, which was first just a very informal bunch of people who were interested in it, and then actually, developed into something a lot more formal. And the daughter university opened for it, which is really, again, kind of very unusual that, that a university would open its doors to us teaching this as a formal training to teach teachers, because we could start to see that the field was changing and that we really wanted to offer something where there was a sense of the integrity of what the practice actually is. So I've really been very privileged to be in this position of just being a part of this unfolding into what is now an organization which has a life of its own.
And you're still very connected to the Institute.
Yes, so I'm very much a part of the Institute for Mindfulness South Africa, and the main work of the Institute over the last years has been this university training, because we're not hugely resourced, so we felt the best way we could spread it was to teach teachers and to teach them well. So that has been our agenda. We're we run a 2-year cycle through the university, a 2-year program. We're currently on our 5th cycle. So that means I think we've trained about 140 people so far. And they're not just South Africans. They go beyond our borders. We've taught people from other African countries that have come to do the training with us. And so I'm very much a part of that institute and that organization.
Wonderful. That leads me to the question of how, prevalent is MBSR, mindfulness practices, programs throughout Africa beyond Cape Town?
I guess it's very hard to have an answer to that question. What I can say is, we are the only organization in Africa that trains, mindfulness-based interventions. There are, I guess, other meditation centers in other countries around Africa. So, our work goes beyond Cape Town into the whole of South Africa, and also beyond the borders into Southern Africa. I do know that there are other teachers in other parts of Africa, but as far as I'm aware, we're the training institute currently for the whole continent, and we certainly are looking at how do we make our work more accessible and more available and more applicable to the continent that we are actually on. So we're really thinking deeply about the models with which we teach.
Pre-COVID, I know you wrote that you had a conference, I believe, or at least planned one. And can you talk towards that? What happened with that?
I think that conference is a really beautiful reflection of bringing mindfulness to Africa and some of what arises, because of course you might know that there are already African contemplative traditions that exist, and there's the word Ubuntu in Africa and South Africa, which is this understanding that I am because you are, and so yeah, so there's always been this kind of deep reflection that we've had to do about bringing these practices here. And we made the decision to have the conference at a place called the Cradle of Mankind, which is... it's where some of the earliest fossils of mankind exist and there's a beautiful conference center there. And so, yeah, we had the conference there, and there were a number of people that gathered together. And it was, I think that it was a great reflection of our context. We had a man called Baba Mandaza, who is a African traditional healer, who opened it with a prayer and brought in the ancestors. And I think the final part of the conference, the final panel, was just incredibly powerful, because we had another healer, Sinatemba, who was writing her PhD at the time. But from the time she landed in that place, she felt the heaviness of the venue. And she couldn't actually stick to her conference notes. She just burst into tears at that final panel, and really spoke to the recognition of the land that we were actually on, and the bones that we were walking on, and that she had to do some work around, the ancestors. And this opened the whole conference to, the mic going around and people sharing. So enormous healing. And yeah, so if I think about that conference and what arose in it, for me, it really was very true to what we have to think about, and the kinds of trainings that we need to consider here, and the kinds of conversations that we need to have.
I experienced that kind of cultural relevancy in Hawaii when I lived there and brought MBSR. And I wasn't the first, but I was a big proponent of bringing MBSR to what I thought at the time was going to be all the islands of Hawaii. And I managed a few programs on Oahu, and you do feel the energy in Hawaii, and the land is the most righteous thing, especially when you're on an island in the middle of the ocean, which is the furthest land from any continent. So it sounds like the energy was felt by this particular healer, and that kind of opened things up towards that cultural relevancy in the conference.
Yeah, and I think opening the conference in that way and closing it, with the same, traditional healer, I think all of that is, I think it's so relevant to what we need to think about here.
So then how does the leadership program that you're co-teaching, what does that look like? How does one participate in that? And what do you bring to the mindful leaders?
Thanks, Ellen. So actually this is an individual project. I had the honor of being invited to start teaching at the university, the Graduate School of Business at our local University of Cape Town. Again, just, invited through one of my participants who was heading up an Exec MBA program. And so I just remember landing in that program, and he was like, and I was like, what should I teach? Because I think at that stage, bringing mindfulness into organizations and corporates and exec MBAs was unheard of. And the other unusual thing is he made it compulsory for the entire class over the 2-year program to be taught mindfulness. And it's remained that way. So I've been teaching there now for almost 13, 14 years, I think. And it's a compulsory part of their program when they arrive, and they expect that they're going to be learning about finances and stats and this and that. There's me with, mindfulness bells. So it's been an amazing privilege to, accompany them over 2 years as they develop as leaders. And, the practice is very much a part of the program. It's very much interwoven into the whole program. And with a specific program, focus also on mindful communication. But they pretty much leave the program with all the practices under their belt.
I think we've reached a point where I'd like to look at maybe the bigger view And I know I asked you earlier if it would be okay to bring up apartheid. And you had experience living through that to the degree that you have, which I'd like to hear a little bit about. And maybe your views on where you feel things have landed now and the role that mindfulness might be playing, can play towards healing.
Yeah. Alan, that's a huge question. So I'm just taking a moment to.
We call it the Webb telescope question these days.
In a way, I think that I lived through apartheid in two different countries in two different ways, because growing up in Rhodesia, there was, a different form of apartheid, but it was, same kind of separation and divide. And that was part of the civil war that was happening there. And I also lived through the transition into independence and change from white leadership to black leadership, and, change as I was growing up at school into from, to kind of being an integrated school. And then coming to university in South Africa, once again, I encountered living with apartheid. I was quite involved at university with, various initiatives in the townships. So, and there were also a number of times I remember at university where, we were protesting and tear gassed, and I was also lucky enough to be there when Nelson Mandela was released, and he gave his first speech in Cape Town. So I was lucky enough to be on that parade and to be witness to that. So I feel like, I've lived through all kinds of, all kinds of transitions. I think it's the pain of it will take generations. We're in our, I think, 28th year of a democracy, and we still have, huge socioeconomic issues, huge issues of gender-based violence, a lot, the poverty. 35% of people are unemployed. A lot of communities still living without water or electricity. So we've got a lot of healing and a lot of work that still needs to happen. So the role of mindfulness, I think one has to be measured around what we feel it can do and what it can't do. But I certainly believe that it might offer something around healing the fabric of the society. For example, we've had, I can just recall one of our teacher trainees, Pateka, who came through the program, and she teaches in a rural area in an educational center, and in one of the poorest of poor areas. And her intentionality in bringing mindfulness back to her community was to see if she could bring back the original values of Ubuntu that were already there. So to see if she could reawaken the fabric of community that was already there but lost through all this wounding of the society that we're in. So it's a country of enormous energy and potential, where you can actually go, like I could actually at 25 years ago just jump in and teach an 8-week program. There's this enormous creative possibility that's here. We're looking at changing our entire curriculum, and we have that capacity to be very creative around that. But at the same time, there are a lot of deep wounds to heal. I don't know if that answers some of what you're asking, Alan.
Well, it does, and I ask it in the light of hope, because as we know, it's not unique to South Africa. I'm not going to do the math as to how many years the U.S. has been a democracy, and all the division and everything going on there in so many ways right now, and where we're actually seeing a live war in the world. I like to be hopeful, and I like our guest teachers to kind of talk towards that a bit. And I think you just did your experience in South Africa, but it's global in nature. And how we in the field support that hope, and how, maybe the Integrity Network, the International Mindfulness Integrity Network, whose acronym is I'm In, which I still get a kick out of. So I'm in and you're in, but I'm a little more out these days because I've stepped back my role and involvement in that, and you're in. So what might you tell us in terms of the latest projects, or in this line that I'm speaking of, hope for the future of mindfulness programs and holding the integrity in the field, and how all this might evolve to that greater influence of, as we change ourselves and have hope, we bring hope into the world.
The most exciting part about being part of that International Mindfulness Integrity Network is the conversation that we can have, and the potential that we can have to understand and learn from each other around, something around how do we get this balance between keeping the ethics and standards of what we're actually teaching, but at the same time really being open to listening to what's happening in the field, and being open to translate these practices and to translate these programs into what's going to meet the needs of the times. And as you've said, Alan, I guess when I look at what's going on in the world, it's, sometimes hard not to be filled with a sense of despair. But I do think that these kinds of conversations and connections and the practice of mindfulness itself is what's really important. And so keeping this balance between understanding that, this is a practice that has a deep lineage, that is steeped in ethics, that is steeped in a deep understanding of what it means to have right speech and right understanding, right livelihood. And at the same time, being willing to be on that creative edge around, how do we language it? For example, here in South Africa, considering, how do I language it in a way that is going to land here? And how do I work with communities that, might never understand the language of John Kabat-Zinn and, need it translated in a very different way. So I think there's so much creative potential that's here for us as mindfulness teachers. And I think there are also so many interesting, dynamic conversations that we can have. So one of the things that I love about the Integrity Network is that the documents that are being created are living. They're not stuck in something that we can keep. So part of what's going on in the network is continued conversation around the documents themselves, and also conversation around how to put those documents out there in a way that are translatable and understandable. And so, yeah, a lot of interesting conversation that's starting to happen there with new membership that's coming in.
Well, thank you for your work and your continued work with the network and all that you're doing in Cape Town. And many blessings. I'm thrilled to have had this opportunity today with you, Linda. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, Alan, so much for the opportunity. It's been such a treat to speak to you and also to have the attention of this lovely group. So thank you.
May we all move forward in our lives with hope, with peace, and with love. And I'll look forward to seeing you again at some place sometime soon. Thanks for being here.
Click down below to join our Mindfulness Teacher Community Network on Facebook, where you are invited to post and share. Also, subscribe to Sing to the Mountain Studio. Ring the bell so you don't miss out on future recordings.